Hello everyone, we are sketching this scene today, a lovely little sort of village feeling scene. Um, and we're trying a slightly different process where we add a quick pencil sketch, we add some loose colours, loose watercolours, and then we bring a whole lot of structure and shape just using a fountain pen and some normal fountain pen ink. You could also use a biro or a gel pen, anything where the ink washes, so the ink is not water fast. So let's have a little go, let's have a little play. The reference will come up here and there's a link in the description, and let's have some fun sketching. So hello everyone, it's Toby from Toby's Urban Sketch, and what are we doing today? Well, I suppose an urban sketch. This scene in particular, I've painted this one a couple of times before. This one's a slightly different angle and a slightly different feel of the day, and we could do a huge amount with the same scene. So this time we're going to be using pencil, then colour, and then a little bit of this lovely ink, which is not waterproof, which means we can create all our tone and contrast from the ink. So without further ado, let's just get started. We're going to do a really loose pencil sketch, because all we want are those big shapes. So what are the big shapes? They're the things which just give the most structure really to our image. This is a time to sort of measure really for where we're putting our colours. But our colours are going to be very loose anyway, so we don't need to get too into this sketch. Just find those really big shapes. And this is where we can start to work on a little bit of perspective as well. So we've got these perspective lines all leading to a vanishing point. Then we've got another little short one here. Little roof, little house. We can just measure where's the top of this house go. It comes somewhere in the middle, doesn't it? So if we look at our reference, the chimney of the house on the right is probably lined up about here. So yeah, about here. There we go. And that's how we can just get things approximately right. That's how we can measure up our scene nice and easily. The same with the bottom of our buildings, about here, relative to the bottom of this building. And just by doing some simple things like that, we can get our scene sort of intact nice and quickly. And there we go. So I think that's all we need to do. I'm going to ignore that to let sign. I don't think that necessarily adds too much to what I feel about this scene. So this, for reference, is the sort of road just off the market where I live, the market square. And it's not an amazingly special road, but it's very pretty. I like walking there. It's sort of the way I walk into town if I ever want to get a coffee, and I very often want to get a coffee, so I go here a lot. That's our sketch. You can see just big shapes. We've basically got rectangle, triangle, rectangle, rectangle, rectangle. That's all you need for a nice loose sketch. And it might actually be all you need even if you're doing something a bit more considered, because we still tend to start our watercolours with a really loose underpainting. I'm going to paint from the inside, the middle going out, just to give a different flow to our image today. So we've got this bush in the middle, and let's just get some nice vivid blues, greens in there. A little bit of blue at the top. And then there's a little sort of murkiness, not quite deep shadow, but definitely not light, which sort of just comes all the way along this street. So let's grab that green and let it run, and it can follow us in. Just going to move my palette for you. It can follow us in to some moon glow, which is what I'm adding as our almost shadow. Remember, a lot of our tone is going to come from the point that we add our ink. So we can just, for now, focus more on just getting some lovely colours, lights, shapes and textures. What do I mean by textures? I mean the way the paint interacts, the way we can create little cauliflowers, we can do little splashes in, and all these things add a bit of just interest underneath the line work that we're going to add. Just going to do a little mix here. So let's add some Van Dyke brown in so that we can pull out the top of these roofs as being different from this sort of murky shadow colour. It's also got a different texture to the paint I was using, so Van Dyke brown's a lot flatter, say, than Moon Glow. And what else have we got? We've got a lovely sort of reddy orange, haven't we? So if I just take, I've got transparent pyrrole orange here, but if I muddy that up, you end up with quite a nice brick colour. So we can just use that. We can take a little bit more pure, make it a bit more sort of in-depth, if you like, or deep in colour. And then we can come down with a bit more of our murky colours here. And across here. You'll be able to see, and I'm sure you're questioning my sanity if I've not mentioned it yet, but I have, of course, edited out those cars. You can add them in if you like. I often don't, and I often do. I think for this scene, they're quite a funny position and perspective. They don't add to the photo, and I don't really believe that they would add very much to the sketch either. So that's why I've chosen not to sketch them in. Got these houses here. I'm just trying to make sure that they've got a little bit of colour, but also that colour is melding and moving around, but also that it's not taking over the image. And then into the sky, I think we'll go with a little bit of blue, just really light blue, really, really gentle. And again, just get it overlapping and moving around a bit. You want this kind of flowing colour, and it looks like a bit of a mess at the moment, doesn't it? Let's be honest. But it's amazing what will happen if you have a little bit of faith, when it comes to adding a bit of structure, and the structure is going to come with our pen. For now, we're just creating nice textures. We could do some more fun things. So why don't we drop in a bit more of our watery blue, a little bit of our moon glow. And you see how there's so much water there? Why don't we just move it around like this? So we can now just get some real flow on our image. Just tap and move. And just creating a bit of chaos. Lots of movement, lots of chaos, which we can sort of wrap up again shortly. Want a little bit more warmth, I think, just in a couple of places. This orange is, I think, a really beautiful colour if you use it right, if you don't overdo it. And we can take clues from the back. You see there's some red brick houses here. There's a little bit of red in here, and we can just take those cues. A little bit of warmth, for example, on this driveway, and we can run with them and just make it our own. Tiny bit more depth of colour in a couple of places, I think. Perhaps a little bit more texture on here. And that's probably enough. That's probably our colours done. You can still see that shape, can't you? And having those pencil lines lets you just guide that shape really easily. But it's also not overwhelming. There's certainly not too much detail. And that gives us so much flexibility when we add our pen. So it's going to give this a quick dry, and then we will move on. So there we are, pretty much dry. And as you can see, when things dry, everything in watercolours becomes a lot more subtle. So where we had a bit of madness before, okay, we've still got a bit of madness, but it's not as intense, is it? And you can very much see this house taking shape and this taking shape, and some sort of fluid shadows and shape in the middle as well. So let's now start building up the structure. And we've got our pencil lines, which is great, but what we're going to do is also use the watercolour. Where the watercolour's gone, we can take clues from that and decide to change a few bits just to make it fit the randomness we generated. Now I'm using brown ink. Now don't worry if you don't have brown ink. I just really like this ink. It's fun to experiment. I've got some pink ink I sometimes use as well. You may have seen in a couple of my videos. But you know, it's all about just having some kind of washable ink, even if that's a biro or a gel pen, which you can then move around with some water, because that's the effect we're going for. A bit of movement with the water. And just, when we're talking about structure, we're just coming along and we're building these vertical lines in. And we can take it as a sort of architectural sketch, we can do it as a sort of continuous line sketch. I think with fountain pens, often doing this kind of loose sort of linear sketching is really quite nice. And this is where we're taking cues from the colours. So I'm making these windows sort of fit the blobs. I did try and put the blobs where I thought windows would go, but then the blobs themselves have decided to move a bit. But that's fine. So we just slightly edit the image. That's what art's all about, is putting your own stamp on a scene. It's not a photo, it's your own version. So we just decide what seems to make the most sense and what we want to get from it. And that's what I'm doing. So as an example, I've drawn these quite hard lines above where this watercolour's marauding around, and that might not be exactly what's in the image, but it really does seem to fit with the flow of what's happened on the page. Up here again, we'll just take our cues. Where should the top of this roof be? Well, it should be where our watercolours ended, so that's what I'm going to do, and I think that will work quite nicely. I haven't drawn in the chimneys, you'll see, but we'll add them in later, never fear. Start with one of these chimneys, of course, up here, and I'll do the end chimney here as well because it's a nice feature. But we're going to work out how much of this other detail we want after we've kind of solidified a few things elsewhere. Another window coming down here. You can see I'm just working with nice sort of quick strokes with the pen. Nothing overly clever, just progressively moving around. Sometimes when you're working a little bit wet on slightly wet paper, your pen might decide to give up the ghost. You can see that's what's happened there. But if I just twiddle my ink cartridge a little bit, we should be good to go again. So fingers crossed, and there you go. So suddenly we've got really rich ink again. Now I'm going to just get this pavement going along. And again, look, take some cues from where that colour's ended, and just suddenly you can use those little shapes as kind of textural additions. Especially even in here, we can suddenly create little tiles and stones out of these bubbles which have formed. And on this side as well. And now let's start building up some more detail over here. So let's get some of this structure on top. We've got these lovely little vertical columns, so we can bring those down, and that gives us a nice basis. Again, look, there's this really interesting shape, and I know there's rows of windows in the scene, but why don't we just turn it into one big window which encompasses this kind of cauliflower that we've managed to achieve. And down here, so we are going to vent a little bit because it's hidden behind the to let sign, but that's fine. And I want it to just sort of fade off here. We've got a nice sort of symmetry where we've got decreasing colour, decreasing detail as we go out, and we just let our pen work sort of disappear at the top, at the bottom, at the sides, and that's quite a nice frame for this whole image. Let's get a little bit more detail here, and we're starting to just decide a bit more where our focal point is as well. And I think it's this, isn't it? So we got this line of thirds and this line of thirds, and this is the flow of our focal point, and the colours sort of drive you there. So you look up here, you follow it round. So we want to continue just developing that. So just work out where you need a little bit more colour, tone, whatever, to build up that flow moving around towards where we want people to look, because it's where we spent most of our time. How can we do this tree? Well, we can take some cues from the colour and from the size of what we've drawn, and then we can just do it really roughly. So if we got this outline and a few little random marks in the middle, then at the bottom just some vertical lines. It's basically hatching, but it's also suggesting there might be a trunk hiding in there. And then it doesn't give you a hard horizontal line. It's a sort of bobbly up and down because we've hatched. So I think that will do. And remember, we're going to be adding some colour here, so there's going to be changes and moving around of the colour. Right, so let's go back up here. Now that we know this is our sort of focal point that we want people to be directed to, we can start adding a bit more of that detail. And we can get these kind of roof windows on. We can overlap our line work, that's no problem as well. So just get those overlaps going, build structures on top of other lines. It all looks fine in the end. Add a few texture marks here and there as well. And there's another couple of windows going on here, isn't there? I'm not going to add tiny details yet, lampposts and things, because when we come to add our water, those things will get washed away. And then a bit more detail in this window. And although most of the lines will get washed away, don't forget that actually they get fuzzed rather than removed. So if, even adding in window details like that, some of the line work will stay. So it's fine to start drawing in some of those fine details even before the water's finished. Okay, so how are we doing? I think we're basically there towards now adding our little water and just showing how this will suddenly be a lot more full of shape. Currently it's quite flat, it's got some interesting colours, but it's not full of shape. But now we can start pulling out where we want that tone. So I'm using a smaller brush here, this is a size 10 round brush. And that lovely red suddenly, well the brown, sorry, suddenly activates to give you this lovely warm red colour. And now that smudges, blends all our shapes and gives us that shadow. Bringing that shadow onto the fronts of these houses, into this lovely tree. We can get some of that red to just come down the road as well. And then we want to leave some light, so why don't we identify that these faces are going to stay pristine and just leave them as nice bits of light coming through. And then this building of course can have reciprocally have some shade. And really quickly, if we just clean the brush off a little bit, we can just magically produce a lot of tone and texture just through simple wash of colour, or rather of ink. And it's got a huge amount more shape going on now. I'm going to let that dry one more time and then we can add our sort of final details. There we are, pretty much dry. So let's get our pen back and we can just reaffirm some of those. Again, we've lost a bit of structure, gained a whole lot of shape and tone, but lost a bit of structure. So let's just go back and reintroduce that structure. Where did we think it worked really well? Well, I really like these windows, so I can just find those lines again. Same here. And then going back, we don't need that much structure in this area, but perhaps we can just introduce a little bit again. Here, definitely don't need much structure, but maybe just a little bit of real depth of colour by some extra hatching. Here, it's quite nice that it's softened, so let's leave it. But let's get this hard edge back between this foreground building and the one that we said was going to be a sort of more of a light and distant presence. If we wanted, we could repeat this process and keep adding the colour and the tone. Or we can just do it at one time. I'm just going to do it at one time today, but it's a lovely process to sort of layer as well. And then this is where we can add these details we don't want to wash away. So we've got these lampposts, got a couple of little wires at the top, little TV aerials, and we have, let's invent some little wires going across as well. And there we go, I think that is my quick sketch done. A little bit of ink, loose colours, starting with pencil lines and just focusing on bringing it to life a little bit with warmth and tone. Hope you've enjoyed that. Please do like, subscribe if you enjoy these videos, and leave a comment. What do you think? What would you have done differently? What do you enjoy from this? What perhaps might you try from this? And of course, as ever, have a good day and happy sketching.